evening and welcome to Your Money, Your Future, Social Security and Retirement Across All Generations, hosted by AARP Indiana. I'm Dan Spehler, news anchor at Fox 59 and CBS 4 Indy, and we're serving tonight as moderator for this very important discussion, a virtual event talking about a topic that's so important in so many of our lives. You know, for 89 years, Social Security has helped millions of Americans retire and has been there for multiple generations, never missing a payment. But the program does face major challenges. And while it's ultimately up to Congress to fix it, you can play an important role in shaping its future as well. And for that reason, AARP Indiana has brought tonight's group of speakers together to not only inform you about some of the facts, but also to inspire you to take control of your money and your future. Whether you're a retiree, a working professional, or a young individual planning for the future, you have a stake in this very critical issue. And tonight you'll first hear from New York Times best-selling author John Green, author of The Fault in Our Stars and Turtles All the Way Down. We're honored to have him here tonight to talk about the significance of advocacy and civics in this very important conversation. That'll be followed by AARP's program manager on Social Security, who's going to share a high-level overview of the program, its relevance to you, and its still unwritten future. And we'll bring you an intergenerational panel of experts who will provide insights into the intersection of Social Security and retirement savings, as well as some of the policy-making discussions that continue to play out in this process. And lastly, I'll hand things off to AARP Indiana to close out the program with a message about some of the actions that you can take right now to start making an impact today. So throughout tonight's event, as we transition from one guest to another, we'll also share some trivia questions about Social Security to help inform you further about the program. But without further delay, I want to introduce author John Green. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and he's penned esteemed novels like Fault in Our Stars, Turtles All the Way Down, and Looking for Alaska. His books have been translated into over 55 languages, with more than 24 million copies in print right now. Beyond writing, John and his brother Hank are also YouTube pioneers. Maybe you've seen them online as they create educational content on their channel, Vlog Brothers. They've also launched Crash Course, teaching humanities and science to millions of viewers around the world. From novels and vlogs, John continues to inspire, and we're so grateful to have him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Green to the conversation. John, it's so great to see you.
It's great to see you, Dan. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. You know, you've been a loud advocate for Hoosiers through the years, as well as a number of global causes. Been in the news on a number of issues here lately, too. What's your driving force when it comes to your passion for trying to influence positive change in our communities?
Well, locally, my passion is that I love Indiana. I'm not from here. I happen to have been born here. My dad grew up here, but they moved when I was 6 weeks old. I didn't have any connection to Indiana, and my wife got a job at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, as it was called then, back in 2007, and moved me here from New York. And before that, I'd lived in Chicago. And I always thought of myself as a big city person, but I am an Indianapolis person. I love this town so much, and so for me, it's about making the greatest Indiana that we can share together. That's what I'm passionate about. And I, want to live for the rest of my life here. And I want to live in a state. I think I do live in a state. I'm a big Indy 500 fan. I think of Indianapolis as kind of the city of speed.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that we're speeding in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Everybody loves reading for those Indianapolis references in some of your books that are set here too. We're talking about Social Security tonight. And you think of that as something that, impacts a lot of older Americans potentially, but it's something that has a generational impact too.
Absolutely.
We're not specifically experts in Social Security, but you have been kind of an expert in captivating and teaching and storytelling. So what drove you to be a part of tonight's discussion here on Social Security?
Well, first off, I'm a huge fan of AARP. I'm a member. You can become a member even before you're retired,
yeah.
And I think it's so important because I think in some ways, I am retired. To be honest with you, Dan, like I don't work for money anymore. I work for passion, which is the
That's
pleasure of
awesome.
retirement for many
That's
retired
everybody's goal,
people.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the dream for a lot of retired people, I think, is to be able to work on what you want to work on, not just what you have to work on. And with an event like this, it's both local and it's an opportunity to talk about something I'm really passionate about, which is the role that these initiatives have played in American history and in the American present.
You spoke a little bit about what you like about living in Indiana, kind of what keeps you here. Our state, our country always has a number of challenges that we've had to overcome. What are some of your favorite examples of people kind of rising to the occasion to meet the moment, whether that's here in Indiana or in some of our, many stories across the country through the years?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of, in some ways, for me, when I'm talking about American history, you mentioned Crash Course, the educational media project that my brother and I do, which is everything from, AP level high school supplementing those courses to early college, working with organizations like Arizona State University on providing college education for American history. When I look at American history, I really see it as the story of a group of people who are trying to get closer to an ideal. And they actually start off pretty far away from that ideal, right? Like in the 18th century, I think it's safe to say that we were pretty far away from a country where everybody could participate in the civic life of the nation, right? Relatively few people could vote, et cetera. But over time, we've come closer to that goal. And that's not to say that there isn't a lot of injustice. There aren't a lot of problems in the United States. Of course, there are. We have profound ongoing injustices and inequities. But to me, I'm inspired by the overall arc of that story. And when I look at the arc of that story, one of the things that stands out for me is actually Social Security itself. The introduction of Social Security and of Medicare and Medicaid into the U.S. has had a huge impact on the world that we ended up sharing. My favorite graph, I don't want to get too nerdy on you, but my all-time favorite graph shows the poverty rates for people born in 1920. That's what we call it sometimes the greatest generation of people, right? That's the group of my grandfather's age, the men and women who supported the United States as we won World War II, as we became the nation that was really in many ways at the center of world history for the last 70 years. And I look at somebody like my grandfather, my grandmother. My grandmother grew up so poor, as she would always tell you, that she stole tomatoes out of a field to survive. My grandfather grew up in absolute poverty. And in fact, in that cohort of people born in 1920, over 50% of people lived in absolute poverty when they were between the ages of 18 and 21. And by the time they were 70, that had declined to fewer than 10%. It's the greatest decline of poverty in the history of the world. And that happened in part, I think, because of decisions that were made by our government, decisions that we made together about the world that we wanted to share and the country that we wanted to share.
So Social Security was a big part of that, as you mentioned, kind of a uniquely American invention that's been around here. It's worked well for more than 80 years. Do you feel our society can do enough to keep it around for the next 80 plus years? And if so, what makes you hopeful that we can? What concerns you in terms of our ability to kind of keep that going through the years and through the generations?
Yeah, I think it's a big question for young people. Will it be there for me the way that it was there for my grandfather, the way that it's there for my parents today? My parents live here in Indianapolis. They live right next door to us. And they're able to have the life that they have, in part because they spent their working lives paying into Social Security and now get that benefit. When I was a kid, my dad would always say to me, "There's no way Social Security is going to be around for you. This thing isn't sustainable."
You've heard people suggest that, through the
that
years.
was always my dad's message.
Right.
I'm much more optimistic now than
Why
I
is that?
was when I was young, because I think that there is so much benefit. I mean, I guess this is a bit of a personal statement, and I apologize for that. I don't want to get political or anything, but I think there's so much societal benefit to taking care of our elders and to making sure that there is that support for them. And also because people like me and you have paid into Social Security for so long, I think that it deserves to be there for us. And so obviously there are some structural problems. There's no getting around that. Congress is going to have to find ways to figure that out. And I don't envy that job. That's one of the reasons I have no interest in running for public office. But I do think that we can do that together. And the reason I'm confident we can do it together is because we've done it together so many times in the past. In the 1980s, in the 1990s, even when we thought Social Security might be unsustainable and we were talking about radical change to it, it turned out that we could find a way together to make it work. And I believe that we will continue to find that, and that Social Security will be part of my retirement just as it's been part of my parents' retirement.
AARP certainly always has made one of its principles fixing Social Security, making sure it remains viable, and is something that obviously involves a lot of public input and a lot of involvement. We know you have this passion for civics, and that you use your platform often to raise awareness and push for solutions to find the solutions to challenges all around the world. So can you talk about your experience promoting civics and advocating for issues that are important to you, and what should every Hoosier know about the power of their own voice when it comes to advocating for some of the things they're pushing for?
Well, we're so fortunate to live in a place and in a time where we can advocate as citizens. Not everybody enjoys that privilege, and I think that's important to remember. And so it's so important to use our voice, and we use our voice at the ballot box, but we also use our voice in many other ways. I was just on Capitol Hill, actually, because I'm very passionate about tuberculosis, which is the world's deadliest infectious disease. It kills over 1 million people a year, which is crazy when you find out that it's curable. There's no reason for all these people to die of TB every year. And so I was on Capitol Hill talking to Senator Todd Young, who's a co-sponsor of the NTB Now Act, and Senator Mike Braun, and other people in our state who are working on, how to govern, how to bring about change in the United States. And I was reminded that, like, we're not that distant from the halls of power. It often feels like we are. And I totally get that. I understand feeling like, God, those people in Washington sure are distant from us and sure are living lives different from ours. But
And a lot of people just want to kind of say, to heck with the whole system.
I get it. And I get that. I get wanting to say to heck with the whole system. But because the system is very frustrating, and it can be very frustrating. Of course, it can be difficult to try to, anytime you're dealing with 270 million people needing to have their voice heard, it's a hard system, but I believe better than a system where only one person gets to have their voice heard. And I feel very passionately about that. And so I think for me, what I've seen is I've seen positive change emerge from those conversations. I've seen change happen. I said earlier that 1.3 million people die of TB every year. It used to be 1.5 million. Before that, it was 2 million. In the year I graduated from high school, Dan, 12 million children under the age of 5 died. Last year, under 6 million did. That's over a 50% decrease just in the time since I graduated from high school. Child mortality is down in the United States as well. And so there is reason for hope. And I think sometimes we forget that because we get so focused, and we should be focused on injustice. We should be angry about the ways that things aren't working for the American people and for people around the world. But we forget that progress is possible, and progress is possible.
And I think people tend to sometimes dwell on the things that they don't think are working well.
Yeah, of course.
There's a discussion about that in journalism too, called solutions journalism, and wanting to focus on things that are going well, and to try to highlight those things to improve different aspects of the community. It seems like that's the kind of thing that you're pretty passionate about, whether it's the tuberculosis issue, other important issues, trying to drive change in a positive way. And sometimes that doesn't always get the headlines, or isn't the thing that maybe people are as focused on in such a hypersensitive environment right now politically.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I don't envy your job. I'm glad I don't have it. Because I think it is really hard, because what people need to know about a lot of times is what's going wrong. They need to know about what's going wrong. They need to be frustrated with the system. And yet at the same time, they need to believe that change is possible. And so on some level, if you're going to report on the most important news globally, then every day that news story is going to be fewer children died today than any day in global history for the last 5,000 years. That's the biggest news story every single day, every day. But of course, that can't be the biggest news story every day, because that's not the way the news works. And so I love the idea of focusing on solutions journalism. And I do think there's really something to that. Like, I think we need to hear that problems can be solved, that things do get better, because it's easy to lose sight of the fact that in 1932, 1940, even as late as 1940, half of American people were living in absolute poverty. That means that they were hungry. They didn't know where their next meal would come from. And many of our descendants, I know my ancestors were part of that half. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember, that like we have made progress in significant ways. Now, that doesn't in any way negate the ongoing injustices and the ongoing failures of our human built systems, but it reminds us that it's possible to change them.
Sure. This focus on solutions is obviously something that will have to be a part of this conversation on Social Security, right? At some point, Social Security is going to need perhaps something more of a common sense fix. Here in Indiana, Hoosiers are kind of known for their common sense values and practicality. Do you think our population here in Indiana perhaps can bring something important to the table in helping to solve this particular problem on Social Security?
I do, and I love the way you said that we're common sense people. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about Indiana.
The politicians I interview from Indiana like to use that line a lot too, on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good line. Like,
I think there's something to it.
Let's
honestly,
do what makes sense. Instead of being driven exclusively by ideological rigidity, let's try to find solutions that make sense. And I'm a huge fan of that. And that's one of the things I love about Indiana. I don't think we always succeed in finding common sense solutions, but I like that we're after them. Right. And, I do think obviously with Social Security, we're going to have to find some, whether that's, there's two levers, right? There's more funding or fewer benefits. And however we strike that balance, I hope that we're able to strike it as a balance instead of seeing it as black and white, instead of seeing it as a binary 1 or 0. Finding a way to say, we need to make this sustainable so that it can serve young people when they retire, so that it can serve you and I when we retire, and so that our kids are also in a position where they can benefit from Social Security.
This is a challenge, literally, that our generation could be directly impacted by. What gives you hope there could be a positive outcome for Hoosiers over 50 when it comes to finding a fix for Social Security and keeping this program going for generations to come?
Well, my dad likes to say that he's a hard-headed optimist, and I inherited that from him. I believe, in spite of everything, that good news is coming, and I think that I have a historical framework that justifies that belief. But I think that we can be part of that solution by talking to our leaders and by encouraging them to find whatever the solution that we favor is for a future of Social Security. Now, the solution that I favor is more funding for Social Security, but I'm not the only person, and I shouldn't be. I don't want to be the dictator of the United States. I want to be one of 300 million people in the conversation. And so I think all of us participating in that conversation means a better outcome for what the future of Social Security looks like.
And I just loosely used the phrase "our generation" there. And then while you were talking, I, out of curiosity, Googled it because you're a famous author, and discovered that we are indeed just a year apart in age ourselves. So,
yeah, I mean, there's a difference in the hair color, but I'm glad to know that the age is the same.
So why is, for people in their 40s, I guess we're approaching, and I just outed us as people in our 40s, retirement, as you mentioned, is something you've been able to kind of sort of ease into as an author who's been successful, and kind of take time to focus on things that are important to you as you maybe move into semi-retirement. But for a lot of people our age, you're also thinking about, well, how long am I going to keep working? Mm-hmm. And are these safety nets going to be around? Maybe it's not something people in their 40s dwell on too much, but as you move into your 50s, people really start to think about retirement. Yeah. I mean, this becomes a kitchen table issue that, people look at and think, well, how's my own pocketbook looking? It's something that I think people of all ages probably need to think about more than they do, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, I don't know your situation, but I certainly wish that I'd focused more on it in my 20s and benefited more from the magic of compound interest.
Right.
All those times that my dad, when I was working at Steak and Shake, and my dad said, you need to be investing in your Roth IRA. And I said, Dad, I don't think you understand how working at Steak and Shake works. But he was right. He was right.
Right.
I should have found a way to squeeze some of that Steak and Shake money into an IRA.
Right.
And for, your point is very well taken, because for so many people, retirement is a light switch. It's not a process; it's an event. For me, I can back away from work slowly over the course of many years. I can reimagine what work might look like for me. But for a lot of people who are in careers where you're either working or you're not, that's a light switch moment. And it's even aside from the economic part of it, it's a really difficult light switch moment. I mean, think about if you spend your life in a career and you're passionate about it and you love it, and then one day you don't go into work anymore. That's a big shift in a human life. I would say that's almost as big as the moment when suddenly you wake up and you're a parent, and you get to do that for the next however many years.
That's a life-changing thing, no doubt. Right.
Yeah, that's the biggest change I've been through so far. But I think that
Same here.
There are bigger ones coming probably.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to imagine what that moment will be like. Imagine, what your economic and financial situation will be like, but also what is your life going to be like? What are the things that you love to do? Or, for me, it's making pottery. I love making pottery. It's an inexpensive hobby. And my wife and I do it together, and it's something that gives me a lot of fulfillment. If I didn't have that, I would feel my life would be a little emptier.
What else is next for you? What's on the horizon? You mentioned kind of being in somewhat semi-retirement. I know a lot of people around here, big fans of your work, would, love to keep reading your work for years and years to come. What's next for John Green?
Yeah, I'm still writing, and I love writing. My next book is going to come out next year. It's about the history of tuberculosis, and kind of half about the history, which is this very strange thing where we wouldn't have the state of New Mexico if it weren't for tuberculosis. We wouldn't have the city of Asheville, North Carolina. It really
one of my favorite cities, by the way, where my grandparents once lived.
That's where my parents lived. My parents lived in Fairview before they moved here to Indianapolis.
They were just east of there in Black Mountain, North Carolina.
I love Black Mountain.
Oh, great town. Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah,
so it's about the history of tuberculosis, but also about the present tense story of one young kid in Sierra Leone who became a good friend of mine, trying to live with drug-resistant tuberculosis and trying to survive despite all the challenges there. And so that's my next book. But then I'm also working on a novel. So I'm not done writing by any stretch of the imagination. But writing for me is fun. It's not work. So it's just something I love and feel really lucky to be able to do.
Well, we appreciate you sharing this conversation with us tonight on Social Security. Anything else you want to share with our viewers tonight about this important topic or other important ways to advocate for yourself in civic life?
Yeah, I will say this. When I was on Capitol Hill, it was during the height of the TikTok ban conversations, and so many 12-year-olds were calling into congressional offices that I would be trying to have a conversation with a congressional staffer, and they would constantly get interrupted by taking calls, and they'd be like, I just heard the school bell in the background. We all need to be advocating that way. We should all reach out to our congressional and Senate representatives. We should all participate, not just, obviously, voting is extremely important. I don't want to minimize the importance of voting. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you vote. Make sure you make your voice heard. We're so fortunate so many people sacrifice so much so that we could be in that position to make our voices heard. But also, it's really important to not stop there and to continue to reach out and continue to engage in conversations. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation tonight. But I also think that y'all should reach out. Anybody watching this should feel free to reach out to their congressional representatives. They're really here for us, and they're here to hear us. And so I think it's an important part of how we keep civil society and democracy healthy and strong.
Well, and I'm not sure people realize just the extent to which a number of our congressional offices or Senate offices provide constituent services. It's not
so many.
It's not the thing you hear about the most, and it's not as much of a priority for some lawmakers than it is for others. Put a lot of emphasis on constituent services.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of things that people maybe don't realize they can come to their representative in Congress or their U.S. senator with that they may actually be able to help with.
Yeah, I actually worked for a congressional office before I worked for Steak and Shake. I worked for a congressional office, and I was just a kid, but at the same time, I was the one, I was the person who a lot of those requests came through, and we were able to bring about a lot of change for a lot of people. Whether that, I remember working on student loan relief for one constituent. I remember working on visas for other constituents, and so yeah, it's a really you think of the government as being distant, but in fact, beautifully, it is, and it must be made out of us. It is a government for, by, and of the people.
And I think sometimes that people probably lose sight of that. I know on our program where we discuss politics every Sunday morning, we have a 25-minute show. There's a lot of news to discuss. Constituent services isn't
Doesn't
always in
come
the
up.
headlines, but it's something important that a lot of congressional offices do, and many of them do it pretty well. So that's
Yeah, I really
good
appreciate
advice.
you highlighting that
Yeah.
because I think that's so important.
Well, we appreciate your time here tonight. Author John Green, thank you so much for joining us for this first portion of our program this evening on Social Security. Big thanks to John for his time and his really valuable insights here into his work as an advocate and as a fellow Hoosier. John, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. It's so nice to be with you.
You as well. John, thank you so much. We have much more coming up here on Your Money, Your Future. All right, our topic next here as we continue is Social Security's program manager, as we are joined now by AARP's Social Security manager, program manager, Jamie Lyell. Jamie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
We're talking about the importance of Social Security for all Americans right now. It's a topic that affects millions of people today, millions more as they plan for retirement. So stay tuned here as I hand off things to Jamie for the next few minutes to kind of explore the current state of Social Security in the U.S. Jamie, take it away.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, everyone in Indiana. I just wanted to start by just pointing out that Social Security isn't just a safety net. In my opinion, it's the superhero cape for millions of Americans, swooping in to save the day for retirees, disabled individuals, and families in need. Today, I'll be taking a moment to dive into its importance, AARP's principles on Social Security, and how it can be a superhero in your retirement planning. Now, Social Security, Social Security is important for all generations, as it provides earned benefits for retirees, those with disabilities, spouses, and survivors. It is a critical source of income for millions of Americans, thus leading me to answer the question, but why is Social Security important? And when it comes to the key statistics of why Social Security is important, I like to highlight that numbers are like honest friends. They might not always tell you the truth, but they will, well, they'll always tell you the truth, but they will tell you what you need to hear. And with these key statistics, Social Security provides earned benefits to over 67 million people. For many, it constitutes at least 50% of their income, and for some, it's all of their income. Social Security keeps nearly 29 million people above the poverty line. It has an impact on older Americans, essential for the money they need or you may need to pay your bills and cover your expenses, and reduces poverty among the elderly. This can be the determining factor between if your loved one or your grandparent has the means to pay for their expenses and if they might have to even move in with you. So keep that in mind. Now, it's the status of Social Security, which is a hot topic in today's conversation. Now, I identify Social Security as a seasoned marathon runner. It's been around for a while, but it's still going strong, mile after mile. Now, full benefits until 2035 is what Social Security will be able to pay, with potential benefit cuts if no changes are made within Congress. There will be a 20% cut in benefits starting in 2035. That financial impact that translates to an average reduction of $4,000 per year for beneficiaries. and talking about AARP's principles, Social Security, solvency, and adequacy. And when I'm talking about Social Security adequacy, it's like planning a road trip. You need to make sure there's enough fuel to get everyone to their destination. So Social Security should be sufficiently financed to ensure solvency for the long term. Social Security should continue to provide a stable foundation for retirement income to reaffirm Social Security's fundamental character. Ensure protection for those most in need. Those reforms should take into account the needs of those most reliant on Social Security and those who have difficulty postponing retirement. Recognize the value of Social Security and its core elements. Social Security should continue to reward those who work. Make important improvements to reflect today's workforce. An updated Social Security program must address the economic and demographic changes over the last 85 years, and also ensure fairness. The changes that happen to the program should be implemented gradually and should protect current beneficiaries and those nearing retirement. Now, working in Congress, Social Security advocacy, we work within Congress and within the Social Security Administration to protect and save Social Security for the current and future generations. Educating the public about program specifics, as well as the overall importance of Social Security. Providing resources and support for older Americans and their families. Now, the importance of Social Security for younger generations. For younger generations, Social Security is like a reliable Wi-Fi connection. You don't always think about it, but you definitely need it. Now, Social Security provides that foundation for retirement planning, that safety net for your future retirement. That also provides disability and survivor benefits, protection for unexpected life events. You could be a laborer or someone that has a very physically demanding job and lose your physical capabilities to perform your duties. Social Security is there that provides that for that unexpected life event. Also, financial support for families in case of that disability or death. When talking death in a family, we're referring to the breadwinner and those that might account for paying most of the household needs. The death of that individual can change the lifestyle of the family drastically, and Social Security is there with survivor benefits. And then also intergenerational support, ultimately ensuring support for aging parents and grandparents. And when it talks about investing, again, just as was mentioned previously, the first SS Social Security payment went out January 31st in 1940 and has not missed the payment to this day. And when preparing for Social Security, there's some key steps that I would like to identify. First, ultimately understanding your benefits. Learn about Social Security benefits and your eligibility. I always try to echo the importance of creating my Social Security account or my SSA at login.gov. This is a perfect way to look at your earnings limits, your 35 years, and understand what you're eligible for. That then goes into optimal timing. Consider those factors like health, financial needs, and employment status. You might not be able to wait until the full retirement age of 67 or 66, or even 70. 62 might be more in your future depending on your status of things of health and financial needs. Also, consider maximizing your benefits. Strategies to increase your Social Security benefits involve delaying retirement and working longer, and also the impact of spousal and survivor benefits. Ultimately, the financial planning integrates Social Security into your overall retirement plan. This allows you to expand that portfolio and make sure that you live retirement the way that you feel fit. Which then also takes me into my last slide. Now, AARP knows you work hard and pay into Social Security, so it's only fair for you to expect to get the money you've earned. Now, AARP's mission is to enhance the quality of life for all as they age. Social Security provides that foundation again for retirement for generations of Americans. So Social Security is your money and you've earned it through a lifetime of hard work. And for the future focus, a fight for the bipartisan solutions, Washington needs to come together and identify a bipartisan solution to ensure Americans can get the money they've earned. And ultimately, AARP will also continue to protect Social Security. And with that, I will hand it back over to Dan.
Hey, Jamie, thanks so much for breaking down some of the complexities of this program and this discussion, and we all understand the significance of Social Security. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Dan. Bye.
It's not just about retirement. It's also about ensuring that this program will be there for generations to come. And we're going to continue that conversation when Your Money, Your Future continues after this next trivia question. All right, we're going to talk about some of the policy options and solutions here as we move on to our main event this evening. We're joined by a panel of experts in their fields to have a really substantive conversation here tonight about Social Security and retirement planning. So tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Indianapolis. Laura, good to see you here online. I know we often see each other on TV. Welcome to the conversation tonight.
Yes, it's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Lee Baker here as well, the owner and president of Apex Financial Services, Inc. Hi, Lee.
Hey, how you doing, Dan? Great to be here with you tonight.
Good to see you as well. We're also joined by Al Carroll, the president and CEO of IndyHub. Al, good evening.
Thanks for having me.
Love the map of Indianapolis there behind you. Perfect backdrop. And Sarah Waddle, the state director for the AARP Indiana. Sarah, hello.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here this evening.
So let's jump into this conversation. Our first question tonight is for Dr. Laura. You know, Social Security is such a big and bold program. It's established during the time in which the American public was just overcoming the Great Depression. To some, it might seem like there's no sense of urgency to address some of Social Security's challenges right now. What needs to happen, do you think, to motivate Congress to act on this issue?
Well, I think you and John had a great discussion that underlined the most important thing, which is constituency action. And certainly, if we don't address the issues with Social Security right now, they will persist. They will be more expensive. And there are a variety of financial analysts that have looked at this and confirmed these challenges aren't going to go away, right? They'll only get bigger. But the most important thing is bipartisan effort through Congress, and to really put that pressure, and I encourage everyone who's watching this, right, put that pressure on your representative, on your senator, right, to make these changes, to address the issues, and really to have that name and voice attached. I can tell you, talking to a lot of representatives, and Dan, I know you do this all the time through your show and your work, right? They'll say, well, I've heard from a lot of constituents, right? And they're telling me these are really important issues. It's not that every decision politically is motivated by constituency base, but I think putting that pressure on them is really important. And at the end of the day, if they don't hear from people saying this is an issue and they don't see that it's a problem, the reality is there are plenty of other problems in the world, right? And that's what Congress will tackle. So it's certainly reaching out as constituents, I think, is by far the most important thing we can do.
And sometimes, as you know, because we talk about it on Sundays, Congress has a narrow window of time where maybe they're actually looking at getting big structural things done. It doesn't happen a lot, but as you mentioned, you know, sometimes the things they're hearing from constituents can play a role there. Lee, how much does Social Security make up of retirement income for the average American? And do you think that should change? If so, how?
Yeah, so, that's an interesting question. According to the Social Security Administration, about 12% of men, 15% of women depend on Social Security for 90% or more of their income in retirement. Think about that for a minute. That is pretty significant. That's the bedrock of retirement income for so many people. I think there in Indiana, the average Social Security over the course of a year is a little over $20,000. Okay. And so when we start to dig into that and say, hey, well, wait a minute, you're working, you work all these years and you get to that point of retirement, whether it's at 62, 66, 70, that's pretty significant. Now, as to the question of, should this change? For me, as a certified financial planner, I say, yes, it should change, right? Now, I want to make sure that I'm clear about what I mean when I say it should change. We need to make sure that Social Security is preserved for so many people. But how do we change retirement income? Well, you were having a conversation earlier with John, and his father told him, and John, like many of us, our fathers or somebody else tells us, hey, listen, you got that job, whether it be at McDonald's or Steak and Shake or wherever, start putting some of that money away into a Roth IRA. I've got 2 girls of my own now. And, my wife's an accountant. I'm a certified financial planner. You betcha we've told our children, hey, you need to do this as soon as possible. Now, will they heed that advice? We don't know yet, right? That chapter hasn't been written yet. But again, it is something that needs to change, that reliance upon Social Security for so many. When we think back to the origins of Social Security, there were other sources. So as the United States developed, many people had pensions. Don't have so many pensions anymore. And so a huge component of retirement income has been removed. So the 3-legged stool of Social Security, a healthy pension, and personal savings, it's a little wobbly now. We need to do everything we can to strengthen that stool.
Al, I want to talk a little bit about IndyHub here. What age groups and generations does your organization represent? And are you hearing more and more from younger people who are thinking about retirement and whether some of these safety nets and programs will be there for them?
I really appreciate the question. So IndyHub, our mission is to grow, engage, and empower a community of 20 and 30-somethings who are connected to Indianapolis and invested in its future. And we do that by helping people get connected, get involved, and shape the future here in the city. So I want to make sure that for the purpose of the conversation, I stay right in that window, right? 20 and 30-somethings in Indianapolis. So it's not too broad here. But I do think that folks in their 20s and 30s specifically are starting to think a lot more about retirement. If for no other reason than because our parents are reaching retirement age. I think you and John mentioned it earlier, right? Like if your parents are, as folks reach their 50s, this becomes a kitchen table issue. So
John and I are getting closer to retirement age ourselves. Yeah.
That's right. Well, we all are, we're all entering.
Right. Every day. Right.
But I do think that, from what I hear, it's that all my parents are retired. So I think that it's becoming a little bit more front of mind for us and how our parents are taking care of themselves and how they might do that into the future. I think it's more so that's how I see it on our mind.
Sarah, based on what we've heard here tonight, I know protecting Social Security has been a high priority for AARP. Why has your organization made that commitment on this program? Why is it such a high priority?
Yeah, I think, AARP understands that Social Security isn't a handout, but it's a return on the investment that the workers have made through their payroll taxes. And we believe that it's only right for individuals to receive their benefits that they've earned after the years of hard work. And that's why we're dedicated to ensuring that Social Security remains robust for current and future generations. I know we've heard a lot of numbers tonight, but I have a few more to share with you that I think just continues to build the case for why this program is so important to folks. And we've heard some kind of national statistics around what Social Security provides, but I have some Hoosier specifics that are kind of interesting. So for most retirees, Social Security is the largest source of income. We've heard that tonight. In Indiana, 44% of individuals 65 and over rely on the program for at least half of their income. And 17% of those retired Hoosiers rely on the program for 90% or basically all of their income. And for the Hoosier, the average Hoosier, that benefit is around $1,600 a month, which we know can make a significant difference in covering those essential expenses. And a little fun fact that I think is an interesting one, the retirement benefits, so along with disability and the survivor benefits piece, injects more than $24 billion into Indiana's economy every year. So we have to think about what that does for jobs, income to businesses, and workers in Indiana. And then we've talked about the challenges that the program's facing. We've got demographic shifts happening. We've got, the program is paying out more in benefits than it collects right now, and that's leading to concerns. Jamie mentioned that the most recent Social Security Trustees report projected that the program could pay full benefits through 2035. And we heard if nothing's done, we're expecting about a 20% or a $4,000 a year cut. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would like to see 20% of my income go away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And then I think, and then just finally, I was just going to say that 75% of Americans age 50 and over are worried about this. AARP has new poll numbers every year on this. It continues to be a big concern. And so that, in a nutshell, is why AARP is going to continue to be, your wise friend and your fierce defender when it comes to Social Security. It's just too important.
Dr. Laura, we talk politics every week on our program here on Fox 59 and CBS 4. And Sarah just mentioned some of the polling numbers as being a top of mind issue for perhaps for older voters. We always talk about in Congress, it doesn't seem like a lot of things get done. Maybe some lawmakers are out there looking for bipartisan solutions or aiming for bipartisanship. But we know that in Congress right now, that isn't always the case, right? Given the current dynamics there in DC, what needs to happen to maybe move toward more bipartisan solutions on issues like Social Security?
Sure. Dan, the easy answer is compromise, but of course the actual answer is far more complicated than that, right? And when we're talking about those bipartisan solutions, both Republicans and Democrats recognize that the current state of Social Security isn't realistic to continue. We already have addressed some of the major challenges. We know that you're basically punting the ball down the road if you don't address them right now, but there's good political reasons why, of course, if you're up for re-election, you may not want to tackle some of the challenging things. So if we're talking about bipartisan compromise, I think the big thing is to see what is it that Democrats would be willing to release, if you will, and same thing for Republicans, and what are the absolute key sticking points. Now, politically, that's never a fun conversation, quite frankly, and that doesn't matter your partisanship. Just in general, when you're compromising, you recognize you're going to prioritize a couple of things and you have to get rid of others. But when we're talking about that particular piece politically, you can hear my dogs have really strong opinions about this too. Right?
They want to weigh in.
They do. They have honestly very, very strong opinions, very loud opinions. That part is essential, right? And so I think when you're looking at that compromise, that matters. It's also a great reminder that we're looking at a bipartisan Congress, right? We have divided Congress, and we may have that after the November election. But of course, as a reminder, folks can vote, and we'll see what we have come January after the inauguration.
And we'll see how things play out this election year. Lee, let's talk about this, as a bread and butter issue that people deal with here. When should people start thinking about their retirement savings? And what are some major top line pieces of advice you might share with someone who is thinking about saving for retirement right now?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So I'm in that camp with John's dad, right? You get that first job, start right away. It's a lot less painful. But I'm going to take a bit of a riff off of that great American poet Jelly Roll, where he did a CMA acceptance speech and said, hey, your windshield is bigger than your rear view for a reason. But if we'll notice looking over to the side, retirement is closer than it may appear. And so you can work your whole life and then you wake up, your hair is starting to go a little gray as mine has, and go, wait a minute. This thing is hurtling towards me very quickly. So if there's anything I can do to encourage some of our younger viewers or the parents and grandparents, say, hey, listen, I want to encourage you. Get started. Don't wait too long. From a more tactical standpoint, if you're in an employer-sponsored plan, get the match. It's as close as you can get to free money. Don't worry about the investment return. I promise you, not Warren Buffett, no one can do 100% return on investment. So even if you were to put it in cash, you're ahead, right? And I'm not advocating that you put the money in cash, just purely talking about the math.
Sure.
The other thing I'd encourage people to do, in this age of social media, be really careful about all the geniuses on TikTok or Instagram. Be a little wary, be circumspect. There are tremendous trusted resources like AARP that are available to you, and you can get solid information. And the last thing I'd share specifically on this topic, even if you're in a situation where you feel like you're behind, don't be dismayed. Don't allow that to become an impediment or an excuse not to tackle the situation.
Some really good advice, wrapped in with a Jelly Roll reference, which we may or may not have been expecting there, but I love it. Thank you so much. Al, I want to come to you next here because younger people, probably have heard, just like John's dad told him way back when, that, well, I don't know if Social Security is going to be around forever. Do you sense that same kind of ambivalence or pessimism from people in their 20s and 30s these days?
I don't know if I would call it ambivalence or pessimism, but I think that the only thing I've ever heard most consistently about Social Security is that it's not going to be around when I need it, right? So what I've heard, or at least I think for the folks that I know, again speaking about the window that I work with, is that folks are taking advantage of the opportunities that their employers are finding. They are preparing and putting at least a little bit away. I think I just read a Fortune article that said that millennials maybe at least feel more prepared than our parents did at similar ages about how we're saving for the future. And I think that pessimism is, at least in my estimation, has turned into action. At least for those of us that can afford it. Now, there's a lot of young people that exist here in these communities. So that certainly isn't for everyone. But I think that for the folks for folks that are working and have those opportunities, I think that we are taking advantage of it, specifically because it's been so consistently told that we're going to have to do something on our own to make sure that we have something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously the kind of thing people always think about in their minds, but once you get closer to retirement, you begin to think about that more seriously.
But I will add, Dan, that retirement isn't the only way that people encounter Social Security, right?
That's true.
So
right.
I think for us, a lot of the folks that are young people, a lot of the ways that we might have experienced Social Security for the first time is in the form of survivor benefits. When someone passes unexpectedly, or perhaps they, or one of our parents passes and needs spousal support, right? So I think that there's way more reason for young people to be concerned about whether or not Social Security is going to be here than whether or not it's here for us in the future. It needs to be here for us now.
That's important to think about too. Yeah. Al, thank you. Sarah, what should voters be thinking about when it comes to issues like Social Security in the midst of this election year?
It's an election year? I didn't know.
We've had a few items on that in the news.
No, seriously though. So when you go to vote in the upcoming election or even future elections, you're really going to want to make sure you're listening to where your congressional candidates, and that's your U.S. Senate and your U.S. House of Representatives, and the candidates for president. You want to know where they stand on protecting and strengthening Social Security. If they aren't talking about it, and if it isn't on their campaign websites, you need to ask them. You need to ask where they stand. And this is what can guide you in making formal decision about who's going to be the best service to do the best service to Social Security. And I know that you're all probably saying, yeah, Sarah, this is important, but I heard 2035, that's a long time away. There are very important issues that are facing us today, and you are not wrong. But we are playing the long game here.
Yeah, 2035 is not that far away. Time
it's not that far away, right?
As you get older, doesn't it? Yeah, that's right.
And in case you hadn't noticed, things don't happen very swiftly in Washington, D.C.
I have noticed that, yes.
We really got to make sure we're having these conversations now, and we're having them often.
So does AARP have kind of a gold standard or an ideal policy proposal when it comes to Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've heard us say a number of times this evening that AARP is really committed to preserving Social Security for current and future generations. And we are really going to continue to oppose cuts to Social Security as a means of reducing the deficit. That has to be a separate conversation from any debt talks that are happening. Outside of that, we want the process to be transparent. We want it to provide lots of opportunity for public input. We want it to reflect today's changing workforce and economic and demographic shifts that are happening, and how it's harder for some workers to save for retirement. The legislation that will adjust Social Security needs to go through the regular order of congressional business, and it needs to be done outside of the context of debt reduction. And lastly, I think we need to make sure that Congress doesn't sunset Social Security, so it has to be reenacted every few years. That's going to gravely threaten the benefits earned over a lifetime. So those are some of the things that AARP is going to be watching for, and we'll see how the conversation unfolds. But those are some of the kind of principles that we're looking at as we move forward in the conversation.
Dr. Laura, any chance a discussion in DC about fixing Social Security, could that potentially create any more risk for the program, or would there maybe be potential consequences for some of the different Social Security reform options that might be out there? How do you see that conversation playing out?
There's always a risk. And unfortunately, I think it's one that we would probably just have to take. To the points that Sarah made, there's great research by Pew and Gallup. And Gallup talked about how many people expect Social Security to be a major source of their income. And just this past April, about 35% of Americans expect that they'll need to rely on it. So we recognize that it is really important, especially in the absence of pensions, as was mentioned earlier, that folks will see this as really valuable. And there's also research that Pew did saying 79% of Americans overwhelmingly believe the benefits should not be reduced. There's actually a large portion that think they should increase the benefits. I think the risk, of course, comes into the question whenever you say, well, how can we make these changes? What can we accommodate? And we're looking at a budget. We're looking at places we can cut. Yes, Social Security will be a part of that, and all of the different programs, whether we're talking about disability, we're talking about older age, the whole program would be, fair on the chopping block. But that said, so should everything else. When we talk about looking at a holistic budgeting, we should say, okay, yes, maybe some of these elements will need to change, but we recognize that there are many people that are dependent on this. There'll be more people, that 2035 will be coming very soon. There have to be other elements of our budget we're willing to be flexible with. And I bring up the Gallup and Pew points just to emphasize that a majority of Americans recognize how valuable the programs are. So while you would have the risk that maybe some elements would come under fire, I don't think you're looking at, just eliminating Social Security, because there are so many Americans who hopefully reach out to the representatives and vote and call and write and are very engaged about this issue. They're obviously passionate about it, that those risks would be fine to take on, because there'd be a recognition from the representatives who make the policy that this is an important program that needs to stay and needs to be supported.
So Laura, I'm going to stay with you here. We all know, some Americans have more familiarity with that process than others. Some of our viewers might be aware of that Schoolhouse Rock version of how a bill becomes a law. But how realistic is that actual depiction of how bills actually become law in Congress in the 21st century?
Sure. For starters, bills don't have arms and legs. So in that regard, Schoolhouse Rock lied. It is a cartoon version. But the idea that in the video, right, you're upset, you think there needs to be a stop sign, and you write to a representative, that part can be very true. I think the biggest misnomer is that not today, not this year, not this legislative or congressional session means never. And that's certainly not the case. You and I have seen a number of things at the State House that take years to go through, but ultimately they do pass. Sunday alcohol sales, right? So I think it's not as simple maybe as an elementary cartoon video might depict, but the same idea that you're writing to your representative and you get other people to write to your representative, and all of a sudden they see there's a large mass that really cares. It doesn't move the ball immediately, but it absolutely does have an impact.
So we all love our Schoolhouse Rock, no doubt. Lee, I want to talk to you more about retirement here. How can people take control of their retirement security? It might seem like an impossible task for some people.
Well, let me start by saying I'm a huge advocate of Schoolhouse Rock. I grew up on Schoolhouse Rock, so nice. It served me well. But it reminds me, Al said earlier, talked about, when we think about Social Security and retirement security, it's not necessarily just that older generation. And so personally, I was one of those children who benefited from Social Security. So in my case, there's going to be a 50-year gap, if you will, from the last time I got a Social Security check some decades ago, and when I get them based on my own earnings, perhaps another decade or so out into the future. So that's very important, and we don't want people to miss that. But in terms of how people can take control, you got to face the issue. If you're sitting here and saying, hey, what is my future going to look like in retirement, whatever that is, face the issue. Take a look and make an assessment of your situation. If you don't feel like you have the resources or that you're going to be ready when that time comes, ignoring it isn't going to make the problem go away. If you owe a bill and you get that bill and stick it in the drawer, doesn't mean that you don't owe it anymore, right? So again, you want to make sure that you face the situation. Then you've got to do an honest assessment of that situation. Where are you really? What are the things that you're doing in your life? Is this a situation where you tell yourself that you use a budget, but you really don't? Do you tell yourself that, hey, you're pretty simple and you stay at home and you don't do a lot of those extravagant things, but that's not necessarily the case. Once you've done that self-assessment of your situation, if you're single or if it's a couple, sit down at the table together and do that assessment of where you are, then make a plan to address your retirement security so that you can do as much as possible in order to live that life that you want to the best of your abilities. And the final thing I'd say is, you want to paint this vision of what you want your life to be. You want to make a plan to get there that is obtainable, that is reasonable, but you got to execute the plan, right? It's great to say, I'm going to work a little bit. I'm going to work part-time at Trader Joe's. I'm going to save more during my working years. I'm going to tweak or right size my investment plan, whatever those things are. But you've actually got to take that final step and put it into action. So you've got to execute that plan.
Yeah, and when it comes to retirement security, Lee, for the average American right now, are they ready? Are they ready for retirement? If you're hearing from a lot of people who just aren't.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that the average American, if you will, there's some trepidation there. I will also share with you that there's some trepidation even as you move up the ladder, so to speak, from an income perspective. Sure. We work with a lot of clients on a regular basis. And so oftentimes we find ourselves looking at, let's call it 3 scenarios, right? Because as Al and others have mentioned, a lot of people just kind of go, Social Security is not going to be there. And I raise my hand and say, hey, listen, Social Security is going to be there. Now, we can have a discussion about what it might look like, but I feel incredibly confident that Social Security is going to be there. So let's take a look at it with this picture of your future self, how you want to live in retirement. What does that look like if Social Security is close to the current statements and the benefits that we expect to get? What might your situation look like with a 20 to 25% haircut in Social Security? And let me remind our viewers and listeners, because sometimes we hear that, oh, okay, well, I'm already in retirement, so that I'll be grandfathered. Not so much. And then for those people that are just adamant that it's not going to be there for them, okay, let's take a look at what that picture looks like for you if there is no Social Security. And so can you make it? We're hearing more and more people look at things and options that weren't so much the case maybe 10 or so years ago, where more clients are talking about, hey, look, I want to have sort of a phased retirement, right? So my ideal situation might mean that I'm not getting up and going to the office and commuting, or post-COVID, I'm not logging in first thing in the morning and logging in every day if I'm working in a hybrid or remote scenario. But maybe I'll step down and I'm doing something 3 days a week or 4 days a week and slowly taper off to a point where I'm not working anymore. And another thing that's, again, coming up more frequently is more people are looking at options where they can live in other parts of the globe. And so probably had 2 discussions in the last 3 work days, where people are looking at options of, what does it look like in Costa Rica or Panama and other areas around the country. So I'd say that for the average, there's some trepidation there. I think there are things that can be done to fix it. Absolutely, Social Security has to be maintained to sustain where we are. But for some people, we're having to look at some different options to allow them to afford the lifestyle that they like.
Al, your organization works with a lot of younger people who might not be talking about Social Security as much as others. Were you surprised IndyHub was approached to speak at this event here tonight, and why'd you agree to participate? What do you want younger people to take away from tonight's conversation?
Yeah, I gotta admit the AARP was not at the top of my outreach list, but I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation because it's something that's about the future, and that's the demographic that I serve inherently is folks that intend to be here in the future, and so often the future is decided by folks who show up. So I think that's a big reason why I'm here. Is to model that, right? Like, and that's what I would hope that folks are taking away from this conversation is that they can be involved in the conversation, right? I think that for me with Social Security, it's not an entitlement; it's something that we've earned, and what we inherit isn't what we have to leave. So I think that I'm really encouraged by how many of us have been talking about how to get involved and what it looks like to model your expectations to your elected leaders. That's certainly what I would encourage folks to do. But I think that even if it's not a conversation with elected leaders, if it's a conversation with folks who know something about the topic, like what we're having right now, I think that it makes a difference for young people to show up.
What other advice would you give to younger people who want to get involved in this fight for the future of Social Security or any other issue that's important to them?
Yeah, I think that again we have a stake in what's going on in this country, and I think that again we're the people that are going to be here. One of my constant refrains is no one's coming to save us, right? Like we are the adults in the room at this point. And for us, I mean, I think that there's a future that we expect to see. For folks like me who have kids, there's something that I want to see out of the world that they grow up in, right? So whether it's this, whether it's we won't get political. There's so many issues that I think that young folks need to show up and be prepared to make their expectations heard on. And if they're not being heard, then we also need to be able and prepared to show up and organize to get the people in office who will do the things that we expect to see done. But for me, I'd say the advice is to continue to show up.
Good advice there, no doubt. Sarah, how are demographic shifts like the aging population and the declining birth rate impacting the solvency of Social Security?
Yeah, it's significant. I think specifically, when we look at the aging population, every day the U.S. sees around 10,000 people turn the age of 65. And by 2030, the United States are going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And this is the first time in our country's history that that's happened. And what this means for Social Security is there will be more beneficiaries drawing from the system, putting a strain on the funds. And then we have declining birth rates. It means fewer people are going to be entering the workforce and contributing. Longer life expectancies. We're living longer, which is great. But as people live longer, they draw benefits from Social Security for a longer period of time. And that's going to put strains on the expenditures of the program. So, to address these challenges, there are various policy options out there being talked about, whether it's reducing benefits, raising a retirement age, increasing payroll taxes, or a combination among other ideas. But the reality is that the demographics are really kind of driving this conversation.
Yeah, AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization that you're a part of. Do you find that Social Security is a significant issue right now on both sides of the political spectrum?
Yeah, I think Social Security is something that no matter what poll it is we ask our members, it always is at the top of the list of concerns. And we find that across the political spectrum. I think a big takeaway from the recent State of the Union speech was a rare display of bipartisan support for Social Security. Leaders from both parties joined in making it clear that cuts to Social Security are off the table in a debt ceiling conversation. So, AARP does a lot of research and reports, and we know that Social Security continues to be viewed favorably, enjoying popularity across many socioeconomic and political groups. So yeah, across the political spectrum, it's real, and AARP will advocate for its protection and strengthening.
Well, our thanks to this panel tonight for such a great conversation. Laura, I know we'll continue our conversation on politics on our Sunday program on Fox 59 and CBS 4 this weekend. But this conversation tonight on this very important issue in a very substantive way was great to listen to and be a part of tonight. So our thanks to the panel for being here and sharing their unique perspectives on how this issue really impacts people across all generations. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to be here with us tonight. Our thanks to the panel. One more trivia question and more to come as Your Money, Your Future continues. All right, and as we transition to the close of tonight's program, I want to hand the microphone over here again to Sarah Waddle to close out with some practical next steps that you can take to stay in the loop and continue to show support for Social Security. Sarah, take it away.
First, Dan, I want to thank you for guiding us through such an important topic this evening. I think it's been a really great conversation. So thank you for joining us this evening.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. We're almost to the finish line, and this is your chance. But before you depart, I want to make some very important plugs of how you can carry this fight forward. We want to remember that Social Security is your money. You've earned it, and the future of the program is your future. So we need you to stay engaged and share this information far and wide. I want to start tonight's call to action by underscoring the power that you possess every day as everyday citizens. We heard from John Green at the top of this program, and I'm going to close with it now. It is you that can keep Social Security solvent for you and your family for generations. But you're not alone in this fight. AARP is right here with you, and we have several avenues for you to leverage your power into action. You can sign up for text action alerts by texting JOIN IN to 22777 and provide your zip code. Again, text action alerts, texting JOIN IN to 22777. You can also enlist in our advocacy alert emails, which will provide you with a direct line to your elected officials by scanning the QR code on the screen. You can also learn more and sign up at aarp.org/protect Social Security. And what better time than now to make your voice heard? As we speak, your members of Congress are on August recess, back home in their districts and in your communities, many of whom are also running for re-election this November. Remember that the entire U.S. House of Representatives is up for election, as well as an open Senate seat that's been vacated by Senator Braun. You have an opportunity. And even though 2035 is over 10 years away, we are playing that long game, but we have time to act, and it's critical to start these conversations now, and we need to keep having them. The AARP Indiana team, including our volunteers across the state, we're going to be bringing attention to the importance of Social Security through a variety of means, including short videos called 67 Seconds for Social Security, where viewers will hear about the impact of the program and much more. We know that telling our own personal stories is one of the best and easiest ways to engage in advocacy on an issue. And I think, storytelling has been a theme tonight, starting with our Hoosier author at the top of the program as well. So those own personal stories is the best and easiest way to engage in advocacy on an issue. And I encourage you to share something you learned tonight with friends and family. Most importantly, your story on why Social Security matters. So whatever the course of action you take, remember AARP is a resource, and we are here fighting for you. We want to thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.